It's Sunday, September 8, 2024. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. We are thrilled to be continuing our series in conversation with forensic and social psychiatrist and world expert on violence, Dr. Bandy Lee. Welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Thank you very much for having me back.
So the stakes are ever higher in this election period leading up to November, and each week that we talk, another week chips away as we get closer and closer to voting day. We know about voter suppression that's going on, trying to prevent people from actually voting. That's a kind of Republican thing to suppress Democrats from actually casting their vote. We know that Donald Trump has quietly wound down his campaign in states that he was targeting just 6 weeks ago: Minnesota, Virginia, New Hampshire, because of this polling showing that Kamala Harris's entry into the race has put them out of reach and narrowed his path to the White House. And with that, he has become more explicit in his authoritarian language, and he's being kind of less strategic and just throwing as much at the wall as he can. And what's so interesting about this is the timing with the announcement from the Department of Justice a couple of days ago that Kremlin-run websites have been seized and 2 Russian state media employees have been charged in this sweeping effort to push back against what they say is Russian attempts to spread disinformation ahead of the November election. And so much of this propaganda that's being spread are Republican talking points. Things like inflation being too high, the cost of groceries being too high, misinformation about the war in Ukraine and about the war in Gaza. It's so interesting, isn't it, that all of our predictions and the stuff that you've been saying for years now is very much coming out in the wash. So let's talk to that first. Let's talk to this notion of people not even realizing that they are being brainwashed, not just from Republican talking points, but from the Kremlin, who are themselves brainwashing the Republican people who are making these statements.
Yes, it's been going on for quite some time. In fact, even when I was in residency training, I was concerned that Fox News was spreading disinformation or misinformation. At that time, I was not just looking at the information that was incorrect, but the kinds of psychological conditioning that they were doing on the population. And of course, this is what has spread from advertising to political campaigning. It's use of the psychological methods that had been developed earlier in the 20th century when Edward Bernays, actually the cousin of Sigmund Freud, invented advertising and actually was employed by the U.S. government to spread war propaganda using the newly available psychological science. And we are at this point in a place where psychological techniques and conditioning and, as you say, thought reform and brainwashing, programming people is available to those who will pay for it. And in fact, lots of companies do pay for it, including social media companies. And it's a kind of what my colleague and author of Cult of Trump, Steve Hassan, has stated that is psychological warfare. And we are experiencing this moment in history where psychological shaping of the population is being actively employed. In fact, perhaps the only employment in the service of authoritarianism and domination, because we don't go out in the streets with armies or directly arrest journalists, but we act in ways that affect people's thinking and have them willingly and voluntarily submit themselves or take on beliefs that advantage the dominant ruler. And at the same time, the public is not made aware, and the public is not given the tools to be able to recognize what is happening, let alone the armamentarium themselves that could that they could have, not just to protect themselves, but to strengthen and defeat what is happening. That is why I felt, especially with the campaign and election of Donald Trump the first time in 2016, that mental health expertise was urgently important to spread to the public, that the public needed to be educated on not just things that would be happening to them, which hadn't happened at that time yet, but the kinds of psychological conditioning, manipulation, and deception that Donald Trump was able to unleash onto the public because of his mental impairments. We think of impairment as simply being debilitating, but certain kinds, well, just like the spread of COVID-19, it's very rapid and efficient for its purposes. Mental pathology is the same in that it is rapidly spreading and efficient for its purposes. And it's a mistake to conflate that with Donald Trump's rational, conscious, original personality coming forward, because I don't believe his original personality is able to come forward because of his impairments. So it's very pernicious and destructive.
It sounds like a movie script, the idea that the Russians are infiltrating Americans en masse through the media, through television, through social media, to get them to think differently. Can't force them to vote or not vote, as in like push them into the polling place, but it's a drip effect over time, that the brainwashing is slow and subtle. And the fact that it's been going on now for almost a decade, I would presume, has kind of contributed to this national mental health crisis that you describe of Trump contagion, where people have no idea that they're being manipulated. And I was watching Fox when this story broke about the Russian meddling, and they were saying, well, you see, there you are. That is another, you are expected to think that the Biden administration wants you to think this. So doing a kind of double bluff. It's Fox that's giving out this misinformation about the state of the country and about the policies. And then when they get called out, they claim that it is the Biden administration making up this story about Russia, and they go, here we go again, Russia, Russia, Russia. I mean, that is a very dangerous cycle of information warfare to be in, considering that the stakes are so high in November.
Absolutely. That is the greatest danger. That's why I felt that the defining central crisis of the Trump presidency was his mental impairment. And at that time, I predicted that eventually it would end up being a Trump contagion, which was what I later labeled it. But at that time, I was stating that it was a public health problem, an emergency public health problem, where his psychological dangers would spread into becoming social, cultural, geopolitical, and civic dangers. And that if we did not address the psychological aspects, that nothing else would work. And that is pretty much what came to pass. We've had difficulty prosecuting him, difficulty having his court cases carry out, holding him accountable, and eventually he was able to flip the narrative on January 6th, where it was a group of peaceful protesters, patriots who were captured as political prisoners. And how does that happen? It was all psychological manipulation. We don't think of mental symptoms as spreading, but actually they are far more contagious than physical symptoms because you don't require physical exposure. And the symptoms travel through emotional bonds. That's what I've been trying to describe as Trump contagion, because it's easier for people to think about contagion as in a contagious disease. And we know from social media studies that that negative emotions and actual symptoms are far more contagious. So Carl Jung described it as a psychic pandemic or a psychic epidemic that is more dangerous than any kind of microbe or at that time, he was thinking of the kinds of damage we can do to ourselves through nuclear war and or with the atomic bomb. And we are still facing that danger, if not facing an escalating danger, because we don't have control over our minds. And we're allowing it to be hijacked through an employment of mental pathology as a political device. That's what the GOP has been doing.
Russia knows this, and they, it's so interesting, isn't it, that they're so advanced. I mean, remember, the Russians throughout history have always been on the kind of cutting edge. I mean, look at the space race. They were the first people to put a man in space. And yet, I watched Fox News thinking, well, are the hosts also infected with Trump contagion? Right? Because the hosts are saying this stuff, trying to double bluff the audience, and yet it seems to me that nobody would be that evil. If the Department of Justice says that the Russians are trying to infiltrate US elections, then surely all patriots, everybody, no matter what side of the political spectrum you are on, would be like, the Russians are the enemy, and if they're trying to do that, that is bad. And of course, you don't hear a hint of that. They're denying that the story is true. So is it the case that the Fox hosts are mentally impaired by Trump contagion, or do they know what they're doing? Do they know that the story is true? Do they know that they are taking advantage of the audience? And are they going to find themselves on the end of another lawsuit like they were from Dominion voting systems?
I think we've all been affected by Trump contagion. We've had so much exposure to him for such a long period of time throughout his presidency and beyond that it's hard not to have been affected. And by being affected by Trump contagion, I mean there are multiple avenues by which we would have been affected. Sometimes it's by augmentation of similar symptoms we already have. At other times, it's through predisposition that activates with exposure to somebody like him. At still other times, it's normal people simply giving in to the pressure because there's immense emotional pressure behind mental symptoms. And so we just give in. Why do we treat Donald Trump with such kid gloves? Why do we relent to his unreasonable, unacceptable demands? Why do the media not hold him accountable? Consider just how much discourse we've had about Joe Biden's impairments. And at that time, we seemed to consider that mental fitness was foremost of consideration, even if there were a hint in Joe Biden. But with Donald Trump, where he's simply a walking and talking exposition of unfitness and dangerousness, we seem unable to discuss it. And well, those who have subscribed to his methods through augmentation of their own symptoms, or whether they simply see how powerful his symptoms are to the point where media organizations prosper or die depending on how they cover his symptoms. And so this kind of acquiescing, it's in part because of lack of information, lack of experience, and most people have not ever handled someone with such severe symptoms. The automatic response is to normalize it, to consider it, try to categorize it among things that are familiar, and to look away. We don't like to look at severe debility and problematic behavior, especially if it is aggressive and attacking. And he also makes use of our rules of politeness or etiquette, behavioral, social skills that people normally develop, as well as even legal and institutional norms. He co-opts them, and he escapes them in ways that would leave people defenseless. And that is the manipulative side, the conning and deceptive side that comes with his mental impairments of not having a conscience and not having ordinary human emotions, but pretending to have them. It will, and as well as attacking and harming others as a way of self-preservation in his mind. But of course, all of this is eventually destructive. And that is why it's so important to point out, and so important for people to respond to correctly.
Why can some of us see that and read him like an open book? Because I often refer to his brain as being quite transparent. It's so clear to me. My radar goes off all the time when he talks, obviously. But I can translate it on the fly when he speaks. I know what he really means or what he's really thinking. Is that because I am infected with contagion, or is it that I have the antidote in my bloodstream? Why can some people decipher what he really means and other people take every word that he says as gospel?
Yes, I think the real question is, why can't some others, many others, not see what is so clear to us? That he is not normal, that he is highly impaired, and that he can't state a single sentence or have a single conversation, participate in one debate, or even function in the office of the presidency without having all these impairments. He cannot participate in a rational, reality-based way. And why don't people see that? That is the effect of Trump contagion. That the first thing that goes with mental impairment is the ability to see that something is wrong. That self-awareness that allows someone to seek help and to seek treatment so that they could become better. In fact, they would escape and avoid all the doctors and hospitals and clinics. They would do anything than to present themselves for examination, because they are trying to avoid knowing that they are ill. Subconsciously, they know what is happening. So they will do everything to fight tooth and nail in order to avoid facing that reality. And in order to avoid facing that reality, they have to invent a new reality. They have to double down on their cherished beliefs and fight everyone who would contradict them. And that can turn into violence in extreme states. That is why we had the unprecedented violence in the insurrection against the U.S. Capitol, when people thought that the election of Donald Trump was being stolen.
But they thought they were doing the right thing. They thought they were patriots. They thought they were on the right side of history. And we heard a lot of that in the legal cases where a lot of these people were prosecuted, when they were given the opportunity to speak. They said, he told me to do it. He told me the election was stolen. And so, that really is, that's all the proof you need to know that he is at the very center of this movement. He incidentally pleaded not guilty on Thursday in Tanya Chutkan's court because, this Jack Smith prosecution is back up in front of the judge who has said, well, I'm not worried about the dates of the election, I'm worried about this case, which was very positive to hear. But again, him pleading not guilty, it's no surprise, but it just goes to show that he still has this tunnel vision. He still believes that he should be the president, or even is the president. And he still believes that the election was stolen when all the evidence says that it wasn't. I mean, the stuff I struggle with, Dr. Lee, is how many times you have to tell him before he's going to concede. I mean, he did mention the other day, I lost by a whisker. And that upset a lot of people on the right that he actually admitted it. Why would he start to say things like that now, that I lost by a whisker, when previously he's only ever said that he is still the winner and that the election of Joe Biden is fraudulent?
Well, it depends on his emotional ability to tolerate the truth or lack thereof. And what we mistake is that we think that he thinks in rational terms, the way most of us respond, that there is a reality out there outside of ourselves, that we don't shape things according to our emotional needs. But it's that lack of ability to imagine someone with such severe impairments as he that prevents us from being able to interpret him the correct way. That's why education was so critical, where we were ready to go out in public to speak about what was happening. I was interviewing all day long for weeks on end. And the public was also hungry for it because there was a lot that was inexplicable. Now, people have become familiar with the psychology of Donald Trump, but they have not become familiar with why the general public would respond to him the way it does. Why do people believe him? And why do people go along with the most outrageous, outlandish assertions? And why would they still support him despite a felony conviction and all the damage he has done to this country, if not to global stability?
And that's why the journalism that has been covering him, the failure by the media to understand the mental health element of this, means that renders most of their coverage irrelevant, because they're trying to normalize him. They are projecting an image of normality onto a man who is anything but, and who is completely psychologically flawed. But because he is wearing a suit and he's recognizable from the television and he's been around for so long, I presume that there is this desire to say, well, if he's survived for this long, then we need to project the idea that he is a real person with the same types of instincts and empathy as the rest of us, when none of those attributes actually exist within him.
Exactly. In fact, the particular disorders that he manifests are ones where he would not have human characteristics the way we conceive them, that he would not be capable of having empathy or conscience or fellow feeling with other human beings, and that he would respond with anger, revenge, and vindication because he is essentially envious of others who are capable of this kind of relating. Of course, a part of him craves it, and stating that he doesn't need it or that he rejects any offer of it is really the problem. And
because he's learnt to mask, hasn't he? He has learnt to operate in society when he needs to, and to give the impression that he is, quote, normal. And that is a kind of camouflage, isn't it? It's a survival technique for the narcissist and for the mentally impaired person, so that they can integrate and not be spotted for who they really are. We have to take a quick break, but I want to kind of go a little deeper into this, because I've just had a couple of ideas that maybe might help open this up for people watching who don't have experience of either living with a narcissist or having one in the family, and how I think those people really do get it. We'll come back and do that in just a moment here on The Weekend Show. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Alo or Allbirds or Skims, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, and the not-so-secret secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions by up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going... So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/weekend, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/weekend to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/weekend. We're back on The Weekend Show with Dr. Bandy Lee. The concept of a narcissist is something that some people will never come into contact within their lives, and others will be like, oh yeah, I dated a narcissist, or I was married to one, or we had a family member who was one that caused trouble, and they do. I mean, they can tear families apart by nature of their desire to manipulate people and to gaslight people. And I personally have found that the word gaslight is probably the most effectual word when discussing narcissistic personality disorder. Could you just explain, for those who maybe have never been involved with a narcissist, about that ability to infiltrate the mind, and how they can make people feel terrible about themselves, and the love bombing, and how one minute you're everything and the next minute they don't seem to care, and so there's the reaching out, and because there are hundreds of books written on this subject, but are we saying that Trump is a malignant narcissist and therefore he falls in line with so many of these checkpoints? Is it as simple as that?
Yes, well, I will just make one correction, that being a narcissist in general is just a description, because the spectrum of narcissism ranges from normal to pathological narcissism, to malignant narcissism, and then psychopathy. Psychopathy is actually on the same scale. And so for our normal functioning, we need a certain level of narcissism, a certain level of healthy sense of self. But when it gets to the area of pathological narcissism, it starts becoming destructive, because that's pathology. And that's why when people say all politicians are narcissists, it doesn't quite do justice to what we're seeing in Donald Trump and perhaps even some other politicians, because narcissistic personality disordered individuals disproportionately take on political and other dominant positions, not because they wish to do good for the country or the company or the organization, but because they wish to exploit their own ends. And that's why it's so important to make the distinction between normal narcissism, narcissistic proclivities versus pathological narcissism. And yes, once people get involved with pathological narcissist or beyond, more so malignant narcissists and psychopath is absolutely devastating. Think of Charles Manson, Jim Jones, all these incredibly manipulative yet destructive figures.
And so could I just ask, you work in prisons, you're amongst this kind of criminal community all the time, so which is why you were able to identify Donald Trump for who he really is very quickly. But this is often why when we read about mass shootings or murder or these horrific events, and we're like, how can someone do that? Invariably, these people are along that spectrum of narcissism that you describe, and the narcissistic tendencies are often in these people. And Donald Trump falls into that category. And we've spoken before about how, the numbers of people who died because of COVID due to his inaction are significant, and how you can live with that. And I saw him interviewed the other day and being asked about the shooting and how he felt since he was shot at. And he said, I don't feel anything. I have it didn't change me. I don't think about it. It doesn't really bother me. And I was like, wow. I mean, here again is another example of somebody who is subhuman in their description of themselves. So maybe you can just explain where on the narcissist spectrum Donald Trump falls, and if those tendencies match up with these criminals in history, or indeed people who have been prosecuted for these very serious crimes.
Yes. In fact, we did a psychopathy checklist on him because, and first of all, to be able to do that, it requires not just training in psychiatry, but training in forensic psychiatry or psychology. It takes extensive exposure to these individuals, both clinically and scholarly wise, and to familiarize oneself with the research that is out there. And then there's specific training on performing the checklist. Well, when the sentencing date was announced, a group of eminent psychiatrists got together. Oftentimes we advise judges and probation officers on sentencing guidelines, because someone's dangerousness or mental health contributions can play a role in the importance of deciding their sentencing. So we did one for Donald Trump, and it was submitted around the middle of June, anticipating sentencing in middle of July. Of course, that has been postponed to the middle of this month. And so all I can say right now is that one was done. We did a dangerousness risk assessment as well as a psychopathy level assessment, which plays a role in assessing dangerousness. And whereas the results we won't really reveal until to be able to allow Judge Juan Merkin to make his decision independently without public pressure, I can say that the dangerousness was off the charts. And in fact,
so Judge Merkin knows the stakes. He even though this case is not about mental health, he recognizes courtesy of your, I mean, did they ask for that, or do you just submit it anyway as a duty to warn?
Yes. Well, I hope that he will have read it and will take it into account when he considers all the factors that are involved in his sentencing. We did send copies to him and the commissioner of probation, as well as the prosecutor. This was not ordered. This was not requested. But we, as psychiatrists and mental health experts, have an independent responsibility to respond to danger to the public. And that is one of our primary responsibilities, given that our voice has been muted in the public. We decided that this was one avenue by which we could do our public service. And that's, it's not typical, but it is also not unheard of. Those who have important information for sentencing are allowed to submit it. Yes.
Well, certainly important, especially in a country where the judiciary has been politicized by nature of the fact that it is politicians that nominate these judges a lot of the time, or judges having to run for election, which to me, coming from Europe, just seems so weird as a system. And yet here it's has been completely normalized, and we've seen the effect of that with the Supreme Court's decision on the reversal of Roe as an example, to see what happens when politics creeps into the judiciary. Let's
we also have a government where we do not have independent panels of experts that would be able to advise the government on various issues. We have to wait until the political players invite us to present our expertise, and that also can be a politicization or weaponization of knowledge, because there are certainly things that have nothing to do with politics that are important to be aware of, climate science being one, that would be important for those with knowledge to be able to advise lawmakers and policymakers. But we don't have that the way many other countries, many advanced countries do.
It's remarkable, though, isn't it? That the US is held up as being so advanced in so many ways, and yet over decades, its politics has been infiltrated by big business and big pharma, and we're hearing this all the time. These stories break about what's really going on and how much of the kind of business world and money ultimately is at the heart of US politics. Whereas if you look to other countries like Sweden or Norway, for example, it doesn't even figure. That it's not even possible to have lobbyists walking the halls of Congress. And again, that's why people need to know about other systems and to recognize that, here in the US, so many people are institutionalized. Half the country doesn't have a passport, and so there is this kind of isolationist. There are downsides to telling the population that it's the greatest country in the world. Maybe we could just talk to that for a moment, because it's something I really find fascinating. This American exceptionalism where you end up losing out on the checks and balances and the expertise because people are constantly reassured by nature of the culture that the greatest country in the world, it could never happen here. And yet we are currently facing a dictatorship and the fall of US democracy, and people are still saying, yeah, but it's the greatest country in the world and we will prevail. And those of us who are not from here are like, just look around.
That's correct. It's being the greatest country of the world does not come from just saying so or doubling down on that assertion, but actual performance. And the actual performance has been declining over time, as you know, the indices of education certainly, but even healthcare, even our prison system is the worst in the first world. Certainly the greatest number of prisoners are in just our population. And so what I've been observing over time is that disordered personalities, dangerous personalities who used to be confined in jails and prisons were increasingly infiltrating the business world, the corporate boardrooms, and the political world, and now even the presidency. And that's been a very impressive progression to me over the 25 years that I've been practicing, and extremely concerning. And how does that happen? It happens through spread of symptoms rather than a rational decision. There may have been other factors such as corruption or disinformation networks that have damaged the environment in ways that this could happen. But the end result is that more and more disordered individuals are taking on leadership positions, and the more they do, the more they will damage society, and more disordered individuals will arise as a result. And that is part of the epidemic that we're seeing. You stated earlier that it may be rare that one comes across a pathological narcissist, but it's not so rare anymore. It's about 1 in 10 of the population, and for those with the extreme end of that spectrum who are harmful to life, psychopathy is now over 1% of the population, and that's
increasing, is it? Are you saying that over recent years there are more narcissists in society than there were, say, 30, 40 years ago?
Certainly, it's a disorder that's been spreading, and it has been marked in observing it take on important positions in society, when in fact it should be taking no important position in society.
Well, maybe we should talk about Elon Musk in this moment, because Trump said on Thursday he would establish a government efficiency commission headed by the billionaire supporter Elon Musk if he wins the election, during a speech where he was lying about, all his policies and lying about Kamala Harris's policies. He's been discussing the idea of a government efficiency commission where, people like Elon Musk would be given this kind of senior position. And also he said that Elon Musk had agreed to head the body. And Musk actually said on a podcast that he'd had these conversations. And he posted on Twitter, "I look forward to serving America if the opportunity arises. No pay, no title, no recognition is needed." Well, we've heard that before with Donald Trump claiming to kind of give away his salary on one hand, and then on the other hand, he's fleecing the country for millions and millions of dollars. This is very dangerous, isn't it? We're talking about these dangerous personalities infiltrating government at the highest levels. The combination of Elon Musk and Donald Trump as a poisonous cocktail is very frightening.
Yes, look at what has happened with the Supreme Court. I stated even since the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh that an unfit president would be more likely to appoint an unfit appointee, no matter the position. And I was fearful of all the judges he was appointing. Multiple judges were even denounced by the American Bar Association for being unfit and unqualified. So having an unfit president who is constantly can be seen as trying to deny his unfitness, will appoint only unfit candidates if he can help it. I've also seen that Elon Musk was transforming Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, into an extreme disinformation machine.
Yes.
Where everyone sees his tweets of extreme radical disinformation, and he elevates those spreading disinformation. He doesn't follow his policy of those that are extreme and dangerous should be banned, or in fact, he's doing the exact opposite. So this is a part of the environment that is shifting as a result of dangerous personalities taking over. In this case, Twitter was one of the most prominent platforms of information exchange. He took over it in order to transmogrify it into this disinformation spreading machine.
To the tune of $44 billion, which it was never worth. It's now worth less than a third of that. But you don't spend that kind of money unless you have an agenda, unless there is a plan beyond the platform itself. And the irony is that Donald Trump was banned from Twitter for breaking the rules. Then this guy buys Twitter and doesn't just reinstate Donald Trump, but himself breaks all the rules, changes the algorithm so that his views and similar views are the ones that are more prominent, and then manages to get himself in a potential future Trump administration. I mean,
yes.
These are the baddies from the movies.
That's right. And they're using psychological manipulation and psychological violence, frankly, in order to achieve their aims. You mentioned the Russian propaganda earlier through Telegram. It's the same concept. Russians are highly adept at this because they've been running disinformation campaigns throughout the Stalin regime, and so had Nazi Germany. It's a major part of controlling a population, to accepting oppression, its own domination and way of having willing subordinates. So now we don't need Russia to be doing this, because many have caught on, as well as many can relate to it. We are having so many influential people who are disordered. And that's why it's so important to inform ourselves, not only to guard our own mental health, but also to find some remedies to this, because just like we would not want toxins spread all through the drinking water around the country, we would not wish to have this in our informational atmosphere, controlling our thoughts and thought structures, as well as our psychological state eventually.
But it gets blamed on partisanship, though, doesn't it? I mean, that's really the problem here, is that we're so divided that, or we think that we are divided. I don't personally believe we are divided as a nation, but I think that the media describes us as divided, and lawmakers describe us as divided, and so there is that natural tribalism. But it means that when the DOJ show up and say this is Russian interference, because there's three kind of YouTubers who have been Americans who have been infiltrated by the Russians, who are claiming that they didn't know anything about it. Benny Johnson, Tim Pool, and Dave Rubin. They've all said that they were victims of this Russian scheme, and that they thought they'd maintained editorial control of the content they created. And they have a combined reach of about 6 million viewers on YouTube. And so because we live in this country where people are like, oh, well, you've got an opinion. You're just a liberal, or, radical, or whatever. It means that the intellectual analysis we never get to it because people are just claiming that your view must be partisan, when this isn't about tribalism. This is about all of us staying safe in this nation and seeing Russia as the enemy. It's all been that the lines have been muddied and blurred to such an extent that there is almost no depth to any of the political discourse.
Yes. Well, the goal of mental pathology is to make everything relative, so that there is no health versus disease, but there is only your opinion versus mine. And then eventually it's to invert what is health and disease. In other words, illness is health and health is disease. That's why we see so much rhetoric of mental illness in authoritarian regimes, the Soviet Union, for example, incarcerating in hospitals political dissidents, stating that they were mentally ill. China did that, and so did Donald Trump to a certain degree. He calls everyone who's sane crazy, or heaps on Joe Biden all his own impairments in order to reverse health and disease. And as you can see from just how much we were carried away during the Biden campaign, that so much so that he had to give up his candidacy, just how effective that was, and how we were manipulated.
And he's still trying that, though, isn't he? He's saying crazy Kamala and communist Kamala. And in fact, Elon Musk posted an AI image of Kamala Harris dressed in a kind of Russian communist uniform with a cap, saying, "Can you believe she actually wears this?" So, and because the image was actually quite obviously generated by artificial intelligence, he was then kind of trying to cross the Rubicon of truth by saying, "Can you believe she actually wears this?" when the image was slightly cartoonish and obviously not what she wears. And I was thinking, why is he doing this? Why is he assuming that people will believe it? Is it in jest? I mean, he doesn't have a sense of humor, so clearly not. I mean, how do you explain that?
Yes, I saw that image. It doesn't even resemble Kamala Harris, but we know that Donald Trump ruminated for quite some time to try to figure out what kind of nickname would stick to Kamala Harris, because frankly, he was not able to find one, and he was not able to find a way to be effective. We had that kind of exuberance and energy that comes with health is something that's actually very frightening and cannot be imitated by pathology. That's why they resort to violence. It's a proxy for energy and productivity, whereas in fact it comes out of inertia and lack of content. Well, he finally arrived at Comrade Kamala, and Elon Musk is doing his best to use his platform to spread this image, because they will be relying on image, emotional conditioning, and not on any kind of rational argument.
And it's interesting because Kamala Harris she's the closest leader we've had to normalcy. She really is a real person. We watch her cooking at home with her family, and we overhear her having conversations about normal things. She laughs and she expresses healthy emotions, and her love affair with her husband is so clear and beautiful to watch. And we don't get any of that from Donald Trump, and his wife now is completely estranged, it seems, and will only hold his hand in an emergency. And so it's so clear to me that you're not just voting for a Democrat or a Republican, you're voting for normalcy versus abnormalcy. And I'm hoping that people are really starting to see that with the level of health from Kamala Harris's campaign and goodness and inclusivity and diversity, that they recognize that is good against evil. We have to take another quick break, but you can answer that when we come back. But I also want to talk about the TV debates, because the CBS debate is coming up and they've agreed to terms, and we'll talk about whether or not it's a good idea or not. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. Did Rocket Money find any subscriptions you forgot about, or any you paid for twice and didn't realize it? Most Americans think they spend around $62 per month on subscriptions, but the real number is closer to $300. That's a big difference. Even if just a couple of subscriptions fall off your radar, those recurring payments you don't even know about can really add up. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Rocket Money's dashboard gives you a clear view of your expenses across all of your accounts. Easily create a personalized budget with custom categories to help keep your spending on track. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in cancelled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's features. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/weekend. That's rocketmoney.com/weekend. rocketmoney.com/weekend. We're back on The Weekend Show with Dr. Bandy Lee. So the TV debates are coming up, and there's finally been some agreement. There was a little confusion as to whether or not it was going to happen. Kamala Harris has traveled to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where she's preparing for this debate next week. I said it was CBS. It's actually ABC News who announced that both Harris and Trump have accepted the rules for this debate on the 10th of September, including muted mics when the other candidate is speaking. I have always been of the opinion that Kamala Harris or Joe Biden should never debate Donald Trump. He is not a normal candidate, as we've been discussing, but he is completely uncontrolled in these environments. And what people... I used to work on TV debate shows, so I know a lot about the studio environment. Even if the mic is muted, it doesn't mute him, and he doesn't care whether the little light is on or off. He will talk anyway, he will steamroll, and whilst the people at home might not be able to hear him, Kamala Harris will be able to hear him, and she will react to that because she will forget in the moment that he can't be heard. It'll be a car crash, and I just wish these debates weren't happening. What are your thoughts on this, and you know, how should he be handled in these situations?
Well, I have said since the 2020 elections that a debate should not be held with Donald Trump, that alone normalizes him, makes him a candidate like no other, and we underestimate the level of manipulation he can perform, and his beguiling, charming, spellbinding qualities. In fact, these disordered individuals are called spellbinders for a reason. Ruth Wilner gave that term in her, I think, 1984 book, stating that these individuals have a way of hypnotizing crowds because they are so tuned in, not in order to be a great entertainer or to be able to gain popularity, but to manipulate in a way that is predatory. So it's to manipulate and victimize is their goal. And so that's one of the reasons why I felt it was so urgent that mental health experts come to the fore in warning the public about what was happening and what we were seeing. Of course, the media at that time were very receptive to us because there was such a hunger on the part of the public In fact, the public responded admirably, so much to the point where it surprised me. Because what was organic was that the public was so demanding mental health information. That's why our book catapulted to being an unprecedented New York Times bestseller of its kind. The publisher, one of the big five, took 5 weeks to try to keep up with the demand. And we heard of all kinds of anecdotes, people driving across the state to get to the one copy. And that was reflected in the fact that within 3 months, we were the number one topic of national conversation. And the media were inviting me constantly. What was really surprising afterward, and there seems to have been a conscious decision from all the leaders at the media organizations that they were not going to air us no matter what. So the invitations kept continuing. I counted up to 70 times that I was invited by either CNN or MSNBC, and either after the car arrived, or after I arrived at the studio, or even after filming the segment. The segment would be canceled and nothing would air in the end. There was one show that did go through. That was Brian Stelter on CNN. And as I was walking into the studio, they practically gave me a standing ovation. They told me they tried over 50 times. Finally, they had me on. Perhaps this will be the beginning of many more. But of course, as we know, it ended with just one.
And they got rid of him in the end as well, didn't they?
Yes. A great loss.
Yeah.
And this is not organic. That's what I'm trying to say. People think, where are the psychiatrists? Where are the psychologists? We've been clamoring to try to get our voices heard. And among us were the most renowned psychiatrists and psychologists in the country, if not the world. And yet, how are we blocked out? And the end result is that the media, far from being neutral or even ineffective, it's actually harmful. This is exactly how media become the spreader of symptoms rather than mitigator of them, and spreader of helpful information that would protect the public from these symptoms. And that's how Trump contagion became such a prominent presence in our society that it alone explains all the irrational behavior, the severing of family relations and friendships in order to support this man against their self-interests and against their own reason, if they were able to get back to that point.
And the debates are box office. We should remind people of that. And
Yes.
really, the debates should not be organized by the networks. They should be organized by Congress. They should be happening in the U.S. Capitol. They should be in a much more, less showbiz environment where it is much more, civic in terms of its style and its responsibility. And then you allow the cameras to film it. But to have a kind of shiny floor and Saturday night style Dancing with the Stars studio and play on music and all this stuff, it glorifies the reality that we have a man who should be in a straitjacket in an institution who is being platformed to have the opportunity to brainwash viewers through the television, of which there will be millions. So therefore, why has Kamala Harris, who has every right to say, no, I'm not debating a mentally ill man and a despot and a future demagogue who will bring down U.S. democracy, why does she feel, or her team feel, that it is appropriate to get on a stage with him? Is it because she has form as a prosecutor and her ego's like, well, I can take him down, or I know how to handle him? Because my belief, as much as I respect and support Kamala Harris, Trump will own the debate, no matter what.
whether he owns it or not, his symptoms will spread. That is a conduit for the Trump contagion to further advance itself. And if he were to win, and even that prospect is unthinkable, it would not be because of certainly not because of his policies, not because of his actual ideology. It wouldn't be because people are making a rational, informed choice. It would all be because of Trump contagion. Why is the vote even close at this point? And you are correct. The correct response, the proper and appropriate response would have been to refuse a debate because he will not have the mental capacity to engage in a debate, and to state the reality, which is that he is unfit to be president and he is unfit to hold a debate. He will co-opt it and distort it and manipulate it in ways that will be destructive and not constructive to the electoral process. But to say so is currently so far removed from where the population is. I feel that when Kamala Harris and Tim Walz came up with the word weird, the entire population reacted as if that was such a relief for someone to say that he was abnormal. And the population, I would say, has been getting it the whole time. That's why our book, a specialized knowledge book by multiple authors, which is unknown on the New York Times bestseller list, shot up. We would have been number one if we just had enough books. That the public was getting it. The population was hungry for it. And we had that opportunity that with the proper knowledge, we would have been able to intervene. In fact, Congress members told me so. When I met with over 50 Congress members, they told me in private, which surprised me very much, that their intervening politically depended on our educating the public medically. And that they were depending on us. When I thought of it, it was what would be the most reasonable route. But because our media are so show business oriented, as you were saying, for whatever reason, it was a decision made not because of the type of information we were offering. It was not even because of our effectiveness, because we were very effective in the beginning, so much so that a senior respected journalist told us that pretty much we had arrived. We had achieved the goal of convincing the public that this was an important issue. And that was when we were shut out. I believe
but
not
you
because
upset the system, didn't you? You got in the way of the traditional route map that the media likes to follow and profit from. And that is to do these debates, to have, everything is preset and predetermined, in the same way that when a senior person passes away, the obituary is pre-written. You know how you're going to handle that when it happens. And I feel like, this is why we've seen this huge rise in independent media, such as shows like this and Midas Touch, because, there is no kind of corporate overlord or interference by big business or political connections. And where, my only direction really is pro-democracy. And to see democracy falling is enough of an incentive to keep trying to get out the message. And I'm sure it's the same with you.
Yes.
Let's just talk for a second, because Liz Cheney has come out and endorsed Kamala Harris. She said she will be voting for Kamala Harris. And as we know, Liz Cheney is one of the most high-profile critics of Donald Trump. She, a lifelong Republican, her father, Dick Cheney, of course, serving in several Republican administrations previously. She said she'll do whatever it takes to prevent a second Trump administration. My question to you really is, why is it only her and Adam Kinzinger that have actually laid their beliefs on the line and consequently have lost their positions, lost their districts, lost their congressional seats because of it, when there are hundreds of Republicans lawmakers who have the same opinion? They know that Trump is nuts. They know he's a threat to democracy. They know that he, will literally crash and burn the democratic institutions that keep America safe. And yet they cannot bring themselves to step up and do the same as Liz Cheney. Why not?
Right. Because of the spread of Trump contagion. It's become so prevalent and so oppressive over our society that and so powerful that media organizations and political organizations, including an entire party, has decided to side with this incredibly powerful yet destructive force. And I imagine in part because they don't understand it fully. I hope it is. But regardless, they will have lost the awareness that survival of the country and its democracy is more important than winning. But they will probably not be able to see that because the pathology has already taken over their ability to reason. And
but they're scared of him, though, aren't they? They're scared of what he will do to them, how he will ridicule them, how they will lose their seats because of him and lose his endorsement. So there is an element of emotional and professional blackmail involved as well.
Yes, well, it may start that way, certainly. But later on, it will follow no reason or rational calculation even. It will be, in the end, destructive all around. That's the characteristic of mental pathology, that it, no matter how adamantly one espouses it and claims one believes in it, it will lead to destruction and death. That's why pathology should be distinguished from ordinary political ideology, which is always life-affirming, regardless of camp, and always able to compromise and discuss in ways that are rational and peaceful instead of violent and perilous. Well, you were mentioning safeguarding democracy. Well, my goal is to safeguard our collective mental health. And I've often stated that that's the equivalent of democracy in our time in history. And that's how collective mental health manifests. That's why democracies tend to be prosperous and peaceful. And we don't see the kinds of dystopian strife and violence if elections do not go their way, and the inability to make compromises or discuss in a rational manner, and also the elevation of unfit leaders. Dangerous leaders rise in weak democracies, because if democracies were strong, knowledge, intellectuals and journalists would be thriving. They would be informing the public, and we as mental health experts would not be silenced in the way that we had been. In fact, when the American Psychiatric Association first came out stating that psychiatrists shouldn't be speaking up about this, about Donald Trump, even in a national emergency, that actually reminded me of the reason for the Geneva Declaration. The Declaration of Geneva is a universal pledge that all health professionals take because of the experience of Nazism. It came out of the Nuremberg trials, and so instead of stating the Hippocratic Oath, we pledge to the Declaration of Geneva, which states that either cooperation or silence in the presence of a destructive regime is unethical and contrary to the humanitarian goals of medicine. And that's where we are right now, back to pre-Nuremberg trials, where the reason for the Declaration of Geneva was because so many medical professionals, physicians, nurses, colluded with the Nazi regime in, well, you know, pretty much what happened, the torture and the distinction of who should be euthanized and how people should be effectively killed. So knowledge could be put to good use for the good of the people, or it could be used in nefarious, secretive ways as it currently is. Because even though mental health expertise is the last to be offered to the public, it is certainly the first to be employed by all these mechanisms that are doing harm, such as social media organizations, the political Republican Party itself has adopted business advertising techniques, which comes from psychology, as I...
Right. I mean, it goes back as far as Coca-Cola and subliminal advertising and all of those kind of tricks that they employed, and that was back in the 1950s. I was trying to come up with a litmus test for Trump contagion, and I'm going to run it by you. You don't know about this, so I just want, finally, because we have to finish, but I was thinking that if somebody says, well, I just don't know who to believe anymore, or, you know, they're all corrupt, or, you know, all politicians, they're all liars, I think that those three statements would suggest that you are suffering from Trump contagion. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. Because that's what Trump has pressured people to believe. And that's how he's been able to get into the minds of other people. So Trump contagion simply means that his symptoms have spread. His thought structure, his false beliefs, and his quickness to violence and attack. All these things are symptoms we see in him that have spread through the culture. And mental symptoms actually spread more rapidly because we are all social animals and interconnected in more ways than we recognize. So certainly it has had an effect on just about everybody who hasn't been living in a cave. By the way, my book is out in hard copy.
Oh, it is.
So I just like to mention that people can go to Amazon and look up The Psychology of Trump Contagion, an existential danger to American democracy and all humankind. It's now out, available in hard copy.
That's great. And I should also remind people to visit bandylee.com and get details of the conference that she is planning, which hopefully will bring even more attention to this. But for now, Dr. Bandy Lee, thank you for joining the Weekend Show.
Thank you again for having me.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. You can see and hear more from me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast. And I'll be back with Dr. Bandy Lee next Sunday, right here on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.